Pedro Alonso Lopez, known to the world as the Monster of the Andes, confessed to a number so staggering, so profoundly terrifying, that it fundamentally breaks the scale of human evil. The confirmed number of his victims across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador is over 110, but Lopez, with a chilling pride, claimed to have brutally murdered over 300 young girls. How was he allowed to hunt through 3 countries, targeting the most vulnerable victims, children between the ages of 9 and 12, often from impoverished indigenous communities, unimpeded for years? This is the story of a system failure, a trail of tears that stretched across the Andes, and the devastating legacy of the predator known as Pedro Lopez. His childhood was a landscape of neglect and violence. His father was absent, and his mother, by Lopez's own account, was a prostitute who subjected her children to horrific abuse. The child was alone, vulnerable, and navigating the brutal reality of homelessness. This vulnerability quickly led to further trauma. He was allegedly lured by a man offering shelter, only to be sexually assaulted, a profound and devastating act that criminologists believe sealed his descent into pure, unadulterated rage. He learned to survive through petty crime and violence. His early adulthood was marked by incarceration for auto theft. While in a Colombian prison, he was gang-raped by 3 fellow inmates. The violence he had received, he then delivered. He retaliated by murdering his attackers. This act, a brutal, cold-blooded revenge, extended his sentence, but also solidified the dark, destructive blueprint of his adult life. The target was specific and heartbreaking: young girls, typically between the ages of 8 and 12, often marginalized, poor, and of indigenous heritage. Victims whose disappearances he coldly calculated would attract little attention from overwhelmed, under-resourced police forces. He began in Colombia, then traveled south to Peru. His chilling modus operandi was simple, yet devastatingly effective. He would frequent marketplaces and remote villages, using small sums of money or promises of food to lure the girls away. Once alone, he would rape and strangle them before burying their tiny bodies in remote, unmarked locations, often in the mountains or along riverbanks. It was in Peru where his reign of terror nearly ended prematurely. In the Ayacucho region, he was caught attempting to abduct a young girl. The local indigenous community, outraged, surrounded him. They didn't call the police. They intended to exact their own justice, which included burying him alive. It was only the intervention of a visiting missionary that saved him from a gruesome death, convincing the villagers to turn him over to Peruvian authorities. Yet tragically, the Peruvian police failed to understand the scale of the monster they had captured. They didn't link him to the dozens of missing girls. They merely deported him back to Colombia, essentially handing him a passport to continue his mass extermination. Lopez quickly moved to Ecuador, and it was here that his crimes reached an unimaginable peak, earning him the terrifying moniker, the Monster of the Andes. By the late 1970s, the Andes Mountains were haunted by an epidemic of missing girls. Parents reported disappearances to an increasingly desperate police force, who initially dismissed the cases as runaways or victims of human trafficking. They could not conceive of a single man responsible for such widespread devastation. In 1980, Lopez's luck finally ran out. After he was caught trying to lure a young street vendor's daughter away in the city of Ambato, witnesses alerted the authorities. Lopez was arrested. It was during his interrogation that the true, staggering horror of his crimes began to surface. He confessed to the murders of over 110 girls in Ecuador alone, and claimed responsibility for another 200 in Peru and Colombia. The confession was so detailed, so chillingly precise, that police had no choice but to follow up. Lopez led them on a grim expedition through the mountains, pointing out the exact spots where he had abandoned his victims. In one field in Ecuador, police unearthed the remains of 53 girls. The scale of the discovery was unprecedented, confirming the existence of a serial killer, operating with a frequency and scope never before recorded. He had calculated his spree based on the 4 rainy seasons of the region, ensuring the rains would wash away the evidence. The man who had confessed to killing hundreds was given a maximum sentence of just 16 years. The public was rightfully outraged. Riots erupted outside the prison. A mob even tried to storm the facility. Intent on delivering the justice the system failed to provide. For the families of the victims, this sentence was not just an injustice, it was a psychological annihilation, a confirmation that their children's lives were viewed as expendable by the courts. The unimaginable happened. For good behavior, Pedro Alonso Lopez was released from the Ecuadorian prison in 1994, having served only 14 years. International pressure led to his deportation back to his native Colombia. Colombian authorities, recognizing the danger he posed, committed him to a mental institution. However, the legal and psychiatric processes in the late 90s were tragically flawed. After just 3 years, psychiatrists ruled that Lopez was cured. In 1998, he was released with a staggering finding: no mental illness. Pedro Lopez walked out of the institution a free man, a man who was confirmed to have led police to over 50 graves, a man who boasted of murdering 300 children. He was briefly sought in connection with an old, decades-long murder warrant, but the system moved too slowly, too cautiously. By 1999, Pedro Alonso Lopez had vanished. The most prolific serial killer in the history of the world, the monster of the Andes, disappeared without a trace. He had paid his debt to society according to the letter of the law, and then simply melted back into the shadows of the South American continent. The legacy of Pedro Lopez is a profound scar running through the fabric of 3 nations. It is a story of evil on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend, and a story of a system that failed to protect the most vulnerable. It is a case that screams for justice that will likely never come. The tragedy isn't just the sheer number of victims. It is the fact that their killer was allowed to simply walk away. His life and his disappearance leave us with questions that haunt us still. Questions we want you, the viewer, to weigh in on. First, when a serial killer's count is so immense, spanning multiple countries and targeting marginalized populations, does it expose a fundamental flaw in international cooperation and law enforcement? Were these victims deemed less worthy of protection? Second, the justice system sentenced Lopez to just 16 years, citing the maximum penalty rule. Does a principle of law, no matter how well-intentioned, ever justify such a disproportionately light sentence for crimes of this magnitude? Finally, Pedro Lopez was released because he was deemed cured of his sociopathy. Knowing the nature of his crimes and his personality, do you believe a genuine sociopath can ever truly be cured? Or was this a catastrophic misjudgment that has allowed a monster to continue walking among us? We invite you to share your thoughts, your outrage, and your analysis in the comments below. What does the freedom of the monster of the Andes say about our pursuit of justice? Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories.